Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 29th of November 2023. In case you can't remember, ATP, it's written there. Yeah, just there, in pretty letters, and they're quite colourful. We'll go to the military aid and general aid segment first to start off today's second video. Patriot and Nazan's air defense systems prove highly effective, according to Zelensky. In his daily address to the nation, he gives a daily address in the evening. He gives a speech to the nation. I don't really report it very often unless it has something of particular interest. So here is one of those moments. In his daily address to the nation, he thanked the West for providing air defense systems and talked about Ukraine's long-range weapons. I mean, they are just improving on a weekly basis. I did a live stream last night with Greg. He talked about Ukraine getting a hold of 4 Patriot systems. Actually, they've got 5 whole batteries on order from Raytheon. So throughout this coming year, they will be receiving a further 5. They've got 2 already, one from the US, one from Germany. But I think they're getting another from Germany. So that would amount to 8 in total. And I don't know, I might need to count other ones that I don't know if they've got whole batteries from elsewhere, but they've certainly got bits and pieces of them from different places. I think the Netherlands have given them some launchers and so on and so forth. So some of those individual batteries might be larger than normal, I'm not sure about this, with the whole central command system that they now have with all their air defense, that is all this IAMBDS. It's kind of control system for the air defense, whether they can have single launchers outside of a battery that maybe don't need its individual radar attached to it, but can you have single, and you guys can answer this I'm sure, single Patriot launchers out in the middle of nowhere that's connected to a larger network? I don't know, but the point is eventually they will have a vast number of Patriots compared to other countries, I guess, given their size and population. They will have a decent number of Patriots, and hopefully that will mean they'll be able to allow some Patriots to get closer to the front line, as I keep saying, to affect the Russian use of aviation around the front lines and their use of guided glide bombs, so on and so forth. Right, a bit of a correction. I reported this yesterday. I've only seen one correction of this, and this was doing a bit of the rounds yesterday in terms of seeing it on different threads. It was this idea that the Chinese have provided mortar bombs to Russia, and that is a big step away from giving them dual purpose equipment or stuff that can be used on the front line, like, helmets and whatnot, but aren't necessarily weapons. Well, this was a step away from that potentially, but there's been a correction. I took this post down, which was a recycle of a story about Albanian sourced Chinese made mortar shells. So it has been recycled. This happens often, and I'd love to never report things that are incorrect to you, but I only have so much time in a day. I can't check everything. So when there's enough people kind of reporting this, I say, okay, that must be legit, but sometimes it simply isn't. And as long as I'm providing you with corrections to that, then that is hopefully good enough. But having said that, I've only seen this one correction of this, but I presume it is incorrect. And I said at the time, this is really big and does need to be reacted to quite robustly by the West if they are finding Chinese weapons on the Russian front lines, and luckily they aren't, at least as far as I can work out. Right, German Parliament member Roderick Kiesewetter has met again with Ukrainian soldiers. In his discussion, they emphasized the need that Germany finally releases a Taurus missile, yes, and they gave him a Start again, Piers. The German Parliament member Roderick Kiesewetter has met with the Ukrainian soldiers. In his discussion with them, they talked about how Germany need to release Taurus, and they also gave him this T-shirt symbolically showing that request, and he's shown that on national TV there. So that is really good that this is in the public eye in Germany. Neither him or most of the German executive or legislative are against that request. It's primarily the chancellery in Berlin. Again, in other words, it's Scholz is the claim here that is not facilitating Taurus cruise missiles getting to Ukraine. I do think that they eventually will, but it's this kind of merry dance that seems to take place whenever there are seriously important weapons being discussed. I don't know why it takes as long as it does, especially when they often seem or always seem to get there in the end. There's nothing that Ukraine doesn't have that they've asked for, really, apart from Taurus. And this is a big one. Interesting to see what will happen with regard to ATACMS. Haven't heard too much about them recently, whether they definitely will get the unitary warhead version, although I do actually think the cluster version is somewhat more preferable at the moment, at least. Right, moving on. Ukraine is to spend over $2 billion on arms production in 2024. So the 2024 state budget of Ukraine provides $1.2 billion for the production of drones and another $1.2 billion for the production of ammo and weapons. That's incredible that drones is taking up half of the production budget. That's absolutely insane. Imagine the UK military budget next year was 50% to be spent on drone production. Wow. And that shows you what the needs are and where this war has gone, how it's evolved. However, $2.4 billion it is only meaningful when compared against what Russia is spending. Ukraine need to outspend Russia in order to win this war. There's no other way of seeing it. They have to produce more kit in order to attrit the Russians at the levels required so that they become weak enough that the Ukrainians can take back territory. That's the simple calculation going on here. So I would like to know exactly what the Russians are spending on their own production. Now, we know the Russians are spending the largest ever on defense and law enforcement. 39%. I was reporting 30%. Well, according to the ISW, that is 39% of their annual budget. That is 40%. 4 in every 10 rubles is being spent on, essentially, on the war and security, interestingly. So that's probably why that's 39%. That's bigger than 30% because it's taking into account law enforcement. But I think you can probably package that together meaningfully because it's all part of the same thing. It's about, having this war and securing your country domestically and in terms of descent to the war as well. And 39% is absolutely staggering. And then we go back to the question, which is Ukraine, or will Ukraine be spending more on production of ammo and weapons and drones than Russia? And if Russia is spending 39% of their budget on these matters, then I assume they would be spending more than Ukraine, and that would be a real concern. Now, Reuters reports that US-Ukraine aid has brought investments to Texas, Arizona, Pennsylvania. These are the places where they are making shells, where there are air bases, army, I guess. Well, there are production facilities, but probably all sorts of other things concerned with the war going on. And as mentioned in the live stream last night, and as mentioned previously, when the US or when any nation gives aid to Ukraine, it is money in their own coffers to some degree. They are paying for stuff to go to Ukraine, but that stuff is almost always indigenous. And if it is indigenous to the country that's providing assistance, then they are building stuff, they are creating jobs, they are raising the tax revenue, and they're advertising their kit to the world, which then gets bought by other nations, which brings more money in. It's really, really good that Biden is starting to sell this war, literally sell this war to his constituents, to the electorate in the US. And as I said to Greg Terry last night, it's not enough to sell the moral aspect of this to people, because while everyone is like, yeah, broadly speaking, morally, the Ukrainians are in the right. Let's assume that the majority of people admit that. And actually, that's not a given. but assume they admit that, and they should admit that. That's still a different thing to say. And I advocate spending US, tax income on the war in Ukraine. So you need to be able to appeal to the electorate in different ways. And one of the best ways is saying, well, it simply benefits the US. It benefits us geopolitically, and explain to the US population, or explain to whatever population it is, allied population. Explain the importance. That's what Richard Barrons did in his talk at Lucerne Dialogue recently. Explain how it is absolutely geopolitically vital that we support Ukraine, that Ukraine prevail, that it's important for our epistemic security, so that the disinformation war that Russia is waging on the rest of the world is ended. And we talk about the benefits to economies, to local economies in the production and provision of these weapons. White House has been highlighting the financial benefits of arming Ukraine to individual US states to muster Republican support for the aid, Reuters wrote. You need those politicians, because rest assured, if you have some Republican politicians in certain states in the US that are being difficult because they're following that kind of MAGA line in not being so pro-Ukraine, I'd like them to sit down and have a meeting with the defense military industrial complex in their states and get them to say, yeah, you might say that in public, but I'll tell you what, you need us to be making that stuff. You need the tax dollars to be coming from an increased production, from an increased stimulus to the local economy, for people, the supply chains to be working much harder, much better, and money flowing around the state. Surely that's a benefit to you as a politician representing this state, or this district. It needs to be a change in messaging, and I think it's happening, and it has to happen, because this is a way to change political opinion. It's a way to change public opinion as well. I'm really pleased to see this being reported, because it's exactly what I've been saying for too long now. Interesting question from the comments here, and you guys can maybe answer this. Jonathan, you raised the point of there being a shortage of equipment in Europe. So this idea, Richard Barron said that our cupboards are bare in Europe. And I said last night to Greg Terry, yeah, our cupboards are bare, but I don't want to put the onus on the US again. The US has got a shed load of stuff sitting in warehouses, so much stuff that, as I keep saying, they buried equipment when they left Desert Storm and went back to the US. They got so much equipment, they can look at the cost of getting it back to the US and go, well, it's too expensive to take our kit back, so we're just going to bury it, strip it of some vital stuff and then bury it. Well, they have a lot of kit. The US, whether you like it or not, has 6,000 Bradleys or whatever it is, 6,000 Abrams or whatever it is, numbers along those lines. Just orders of magnitude above what other countries have. And so they don't have a shortage. The question is, how do we get that kit that might be excess to needs from the US to Ukraine? We don't have to put the onus on the US here to provide that, in terms of spending the money themselves to okay, here's our kit, and we're going to pay for our kit to be built and then sent now. Okay, we're not paying it to be built anymore. It has been built. But do we need to replace it, or is it spare? The question here is, you raise a point of there being a shortage of equipment in Europe to send to Ukraine, and if the US gives equipment, it looks like US is at a proxy war. So if the US themselves say, okay, we're going to give all this equipment to Ukraine, it looks like the US is really waging war with Ukraine. But can't European countries just buy some of that vast array of surplus the US has and give it to Ukraine? I'm sure, I have heard before that this has been happening in certain areas, although I can't confirm that. So one, I'd like to know if it has been happening, and two, can this happen? Can Europe say, okay, we'll buy 200 Bradleys off you and send them to Ukraine? We'll pay for them at some kind of hopefully preferential rate. But also, it's not, the onus isn't just solely on the US. That seems like an eminently sensible option. Right, moving on to Russian situations here. This is a unmanned sea vehicle that the Russian military will allegedly receive soon. It is equipped with grenade launchers and machine guns and can potentially serve as an attacking drone unmanned sea vehicle, counter Ukrainian unmanned sea vehicle drones, or it can be an ISI, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or port defense platform. So potentially has a lot of uses. Let's have a look at this. I mean, it looks pretty sweet, although it looks like it's already got a dent there. This is, the grenade launcher on the front. One assumes that it's pretty decent because it looks decent, but is it? I mean, does it have the capabilities, and can they produce it at scale? Now, if it does have the capabilities and they can produce it at scale, then this is a genuine worry. Russia are developing things, although, was it this one? Yeah, so I found Samuel Bendit's comment beneath this quite interesting. So, learning from Ukraine, ? The Russian MOD will apparently receive its first, ? naval drones by the end of the year from the KMZ holding, and, quote, the MOD has already agreed on the delivery of the first 10 units, which will be tested in the war. The use of the ? There is, I think, to say, really? Is this only their first drone? So, Russia producing this shows that they are adapting, but actually, Ukraine have been playing around with naval drones for an awful long time now. And if this is the first Russian example of the first Russian drone, then that means that they are somewhat behind. However, like I said last night, the Russians will catch up no matter what it is that the Ukrainians get some advantage over the Russians with. The Russians will eventually catch up, and this is potentially a moment where they have. ? Above refers to the fact, I didn't read this, that the Russian MOD had at least 17 different unmanned sea drone projects at various stages of development before February 2022. This could be the first maritime drone to actually go into combat, but no details were given just yet. Again, it kind of same basic idea though. That if you had that many projects on the go before February 2022, why is it taking you almost 2 years to get something that can float and do, unmanned sea vehicle stuff? That said, this is a concern for the Ukrainians, of course. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff, and there's quite a lot to get through as ever. Dmitry Kuleba, who is the Ukrainian foreign minister, is to boycott the OSCE meeting over the Russian delegation's presence. So the Ukrainian delegation will not attend the upcoming OSCE meeting of foreign ministers due to Russia's presence, Ukraine's foreign ministry spokesperson said yesterday. Now, the OSCE, just to remind you, is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a regional security-orientated, governmental organization-oriented, comprising member states in Europe, North America, and Asia. Its mandate includes issues such as arms control, the promotion of human rights, freedom of the press, and free and fair elections, none of which Russia qualifies to have any opinion on. They fail in terms of human rights, they fail in terms of freedom of the press, they fail in terms of free and fair elections, and they fail in terms of arms control. And they're waging war, which is rather against security and cooperation in Europe on a European country. This is just so I absolutely don't have an issue with Ukraine boycotting, and thankfully the foreign ministers of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania are also going to boycott the OSCE meeting. They regret the decision on Sergei Lavrov's attendance at the OSCE session, as this is yet another possibility for Russia to engage in propaganda. Absolutely, they should become the absolute pariah nation and not be a part of anything as far as I'm concerned. What use is Russia being there to anyone else? Other than to say but we went, but what about all Ukrainians are Nazis? So shut up. Just, honestly, my frustration levels with Russia have reached a critical point where I'm almost becoming dismissive. And that's not my fault for being intolerant. That's Russia's fault for being wildly intolerant of freedom and self-determination and the right of existence of humans who adopt the identity of Ukrainian. So Russia needs to take a long, hard look at themselves, because as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't be welcome at any of those kind of conferences. Right, the US Secretary of State has said negotiations with Russia would not be a dialogue, but a, quote, monologue of surrender. Speaking at Brussels, Secretary Blinken said, quote, Putin is talking about waiting another year or more before he thinks about ending this war. So that is literally Putin's Trump card, Trump's Putin card, Putin's Trump card. And I think that is super important to see Secretary Blinken recognize that very, very overtly, that Russia are trying this long game, and that if there is any call to go to the negotiating table at the moment, it would just be Russia wanting Ukraine to surrender pretty much everything it can. And talking kind of in a similar vein, and I'm going to repeat myself from last night again, but I had a bit of a talk about Olaf Scholz, I think, having had a light bulb moment at some point in the last few months. And I think Germany as a whole, put Taurus aside here, but in general, Germany has woken up and is taking a lead. I think there's been this really big realization that Germany needs to take the military role at the center of Europe. Because if they don't, Poland will, and that's probably not in a geopolitical interest. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but Germany have historically been kind of the linchpin of the EU, right? Germany and France, Germany have been dealing with the legacy of the Second World War and Nazism to the point where they've not wanted to spend crazy amounts on defense. They've wanted to be a little bit, quietly competent with their defense, but not really doing things that puts Germany as a major military power in the world. And I think there's been this realization since actually quite early on in the war. 5,000 helmets soon turned into playing around with the whole defense strategy and turning it on its head. And we're at a point now, a year and a half later, or plus, almost 2 years later, where Scholz has gone, this is really serious. This is really serious, and Germany needs to be at the center of assisting Ukraine, and we need to be uniting Europe as well, or playing a really major military role in Europe. I think this is definitely good for Ukraine and probably good for Germany. In fact, he wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't good for Germany. So if you're German, I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I think geopolitically, Germany are asserting themselves again on the world, but hopefully in a much more benign way than they did sort of 75 years ago or whatever. So it's worth taking a note when Scholz says things like this, and I'm going to read out what he said. I'll read out the subtitles. So, today, Germany is the second largest supporter of Ukraine, and that's after the US. There was a piece that came out the other day saying they're now the biggest supporter, but I don't think they are. But nonetheless, they are behind the US as now being the second biggest supporter, which is significant after the US, also in terms of arms deliveries. We will continue this support for as long as it takes. I mean, I wish that was changed, that phrase, for as long as it takes, to something much more proactive rather than reactive. Nonetheless, rhetorically, this is going in the right direction. Our civilian support is added to this through the federal budget and also through the European Union. So that's recognizing that we also contribute I was going to say a shit ton. Oh, I just did. Of assistance to Ukraine through the EU. So don't just think it's this bilateral amount that is on, graphs or whatever. We also contribute 25 to 30% of the EU budget or whatever it is. And so when you look at what the EU has given to Ukraine, which is pretty vast, actually Germany is responsible for a good portion of that as well, that you can add to their bilateral support. Money that we had, of course, not budgeted for when we took power and before the war began. And yet this support is of existential importance. Now, this is where it gets really serious for me. This is where we are starting to see that Scholz recognizes the magnitude of what is going on in Ukraine. as a result of Russia's invasion, and how this has huge implications for the stability of the globe and for the existence of the EU. If Ukraine doesn't prevail, if Russia wins in the Ukraine war, then that is a direct assault on the EU. That has ramifications for the EU. Really does. Anyway, he continues. And that's clapped for Ukraine. That is, and it's great that the people there are recognizing by applauding, and yet this support is of existential importance. If everyone is agreeing with that, that is majorly important. For Ukraine, that is clear, but also in the end for us in Europe, because none of us wants to imagine what even more serious consequences it would have for us if Putin were to win this war. And it's this idea that, look, you can pay $5 now or you can pay $100 later. It's essentially better to pay $5 now, guys. So let's do it. Yeah. Right, Anton Gerashchenko says the Russian Internal Affairs Ministry has proposed to oblige foreigners to sign a, quote, loyalty agreement when entering Russia. They would be forbidden to talk about LGBT and criticize the authorities. There's nothing says freedom and liberty like what Russia does on a daily basis with its legislations and its cultural assaults on pretty much anyone that doesn't fall within this very prescribed notion of traditional values and, you know, Russian orthodoxy. Nothing says liberty like that, right? The agreement suggests to specify that a foreigner, while in Russia, is prohibited to, quote, obstruct the activities of public authorities of the Russian Federation, discredit in any form the foreign and domestic state policy of the Russian Federation, public authorities and their officials. There will also be a ban on, quote, abusing the right to freedom of information, including by disseminating information aimed at belittling or encouraging the denial of constitutionally significant moral and other values, including ideas about marriage as a union of a man and a woman, family, motherhood, fatherhood, childhood, propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations, distorting the historical truth about the feat of the Soviet people in defense of the fatherland and its contribution to the victory over fascism. Holy cow, I can't tell you how problematic that is. This is now, we're back to Soviet era regulations. We are back to Stasi in East Germany. We're back to really officious regulation and control. This is utter control of the Russian population, but anyone coming in. So what does this say about press that want to now report on these things? They can't do that because press would be breaking those rules just by saying anything, basically. And you can't. So when it says distorting the historical truth, that is their revisionist truth. It's not truth at all. It's not in any objective sense. So when Russia is saying that if you distort our historical, scare quotes, reality, our revisionist history that we are just writing ourselves, pulling out of our posteriors, our propaganda, if you want to distort our propaganda, we're going to lock you up. Wow, so truth no longer can survive in that kind of environment. This is properly scary stuff. Like, again, if you are anywhere near pro-Russian and on my threads, and you agree with this, you are an absolute idiot. I'm going to just be a little bit rude now. Like I always say, we should respectfully talk to each other, blah, blah, blah. But like the only reason you would support that is if the Kremlin is paying you. Otherwise, you've got such a distorted view of reality that you and I can't talk really respectfully because you're not accessing rationality when you're presenting your beliefs. You will just be accessing stuff that is immune to rational critique, and that makes conversation. It's like arguing with flat earthers. Like a flat earther, you can't have an argument with a flat earther because they're so willing to go off-piste that actually so Stephen Law, the philosopher, it's not quite the same, but he talks about this thing called going nuclear, which is where you kind of like you start questioning rationality itself, and it's like as soon as you go down those routes, then we can't have a rational discussion because you're kind of pulling out the rug from rational discourse. This is almost the same. Like if you're willing to say you believe the Earth is only 6,000 years old or the Earth is flat or whatever, then you are using tools that are so incongruent with the kind of tools I use to create my rational worldview that there is no point me trying to disabuse you of those notions. There's no point me trying to show you that you are wrong because you're using such different tools to me that the whole framework of your intellectual pursuits is just foreign, and our languages are too different. So if you agree with this kind of stuff, we can't really talk because I'm not going to convince you because we're not speaking the same language. The agreement, sorry, I'm ranting. The agreement, according to TASS, will also specify a ban on actions aimed at the adoption, amendment, abolition of laws, as well as careless attitude to the environment, natural resources, material, and cultural values. Oh, there's a bit of environmentalism thrown in there for good measure. So sorry, I need to get off my soapbox. Right, Anton Gerashchenko again says Finland closes all border control points at the border with Russia for all persons seeking shelter until December the 13th. Head of Finland Cabinet of Ministers. So again, this is an ongoing issue. Tent camps and temporary accommodation points were set up for the newcomers at the border with Finland. The governor of the Murmansk region, Andrei Chibis, has said that foreigners heading to Finland made an attempt to break through the Russian border. This is from a few days ago, and I reported this. And this is the whole idea that the Russians are sort of motivating a large, or certainly a comparatively large wave of migrants to go to Finland. This is not something they've done before. And although compared to other border points in other parts of the world, this isn't big, this is massive compared to what it was, right? When you've got at least, as I've said before, at least a 2,400% rise in this kind of migration from what it was in August to now, this is concerning. Now, the Finnish are saying we've got evidence, as I've said before, we've got evidence that it's being promoted, this being done by the Russian police agencies, and basically this is a Russian project. Well, lots of people are recognizing this. So Poland will send a group of advisors to Finland amid ongoing migrant surge to the Finland-Russian border, which is believed to be orchestrated by Moscow. The decision has been made after talks between Polish President Duda and Finnish President Niinisto. Furthermore, I mean, here we just got some more footage. This is a line of migrants, a coach there with sort of bicycles ready to go. And the idea is that these are all new bicycles provided by the Russians, and as you can see, that's what happens to the bikes after they are used. I mean, they've just got these scrapyards of brand new bikes at the Finnish border. But anyway, there is a lot of talk about this being a planned Russian thing, and that talk is being confirmed by other nations as well. In fact, I did have one. Where's it gone? I did have another one about how it is, that it is referencing again the activity that's gone on in Belarus with the Polish border since 2014. Okay. So Dmitry Peskov, sort of spokesperson for the Kremlin, speaks about tensions with Finland. He says that about Finland's reinforcement of the border security with Russia, nothing and no one threatens Finland. Sending European and in particular Polish units is redundant measures. It's absolutely unprovoked, unjustified concentration of armed units, and tensions may arise just in the course of the concentration of additional units on our border. The Finns should clearly realise that this will pose a threat to us. From the briefing of Dmitry Peskov on the 29th, so that's actually from this morning. I mean, this is it appears to be becoming a bit of a problem between the two nations. Talking of border issues, Donald Tusk, who is probably going to be the next Polish Prime Minister. They hasn't formed a coalition government yet. They're still waiting, I presume, for the Justice and Law Party, who are what are looking like outgoing government, to try and make a minority government. They actually got the most parliamentarians, or the biggest percentage of the vote, the Justice and Law Party, who were ruling, but it wasn't enough for a majority government, and no one wants to go into a minority government with them, or at least not enough people to create a majority coalition. However, there are opposition parties who will go into coalition together. So it's kind of like this weird period where there's lots of debates going on, and lots of deals going on between parties to see who will create this coalition. So it's likely to be Tusk. Well, he said, Poland's Civic Coalition leader, Donald Tusk, accused Poland's government of inaction regarding the blockade on the border with Ukraine. So this is where the Polish truckers are blocking the border, and there's a lot of talk about them being somewhat supported by the Russians as well. So again, two border issues, two areas of issues of social cohesion, or issues of stability that have been directly affected, or even manipulated by Russia. And concerning the one on the Polish border, here we have revenge of Ukrainian drivers. This is kind of what you don't want. Although you might think, yeah, Ukraine need to start, putting their foot down. Actually, this is kind of escalatory, and you don't want this within Poland. So you've got Ukrainian drivers at the border with Poland in the Polish cities, actually, that word, and Medyikiv. Drivers from Ukraine have blocked roads to protest against the blocking of the border crossing points. So it's kind of tit for tat. It doesn't look as huge, I don't think, but it's still really not what you want between those two allies. EU sanctions envoy has said that Kazakhstan is reducing export of dual-use goods to Russia. That's really good news. Although, you might want to look at Kyrgyzstan. Kazakhstan has significantly reduced its exports of dual-use goods to Russia, but its export of other goods to Russia have increased, EU sanctions envoy David O'Sullivan has said. And in a similar kind of vein, investigative stories from Ukraine. So this is where the Kiev Independent do a bit of investigative journalism. Russia receives Ukrainian-made aviation spare parts despite the war. I mean, it seems insane, but actually it's completely unsurprising. So this goes back to the kind of loophole issue of manufacturing entities within Ukraine are making spare parts for the airline industry, as they have previously have done. This is a normal thing, and we sell it to these people outside of Ukraine, and then those people sell it to someone else, and they sell it to someone else, and eventually it gets to Russia. And so you can see Ukrainian spare parts in the airline industry in Russia and go, what the hell are you doing? But it's not a case of going to, as I said about the German entities selling it to Russia through Kyrgyzstan. It's not necessarily like the German entities' faults or the Ukrainian entities' faults here. I mean, if you ask the Ukrainian workers there, do you think it's great? Do you want to sell your stuff to Russia? They would no doubt go, no, damn it, no, we don't. It's not them that are doing that. They're selling it bona fide to these third parties who then will sell it on and on and on, and eventually gets to Russia. How do you stop that from happening? That's the question, really. That it happens isn't surprising. It's just super frustrating when actually it's a Ukrainian. I mean, it's a deep, horrible irony that it's a Ukrainian part being used in a Russian airplane. But I presume that's civil aviation. But who knows? So Reuters reporting here, Russia's oil trade with India faces currency obstacles. So Russia's oil trade with India, one of its leading buyers, faces an obstacle due to payments in currency other than the dollar, Reuters reported on November 27th, citing undisclosed sources. So this is good news for Ukraine. If India have issues with doing trade with Russia because of the use of the ruble, then that's good news. Nobody who is allied with Ukraine will want to see Russia able to do business, able to export effectively to other countries. We need to make that as difficult as possible and hopefully impossible. Okay. this can't be ignored. In Belarus, it's what you expect of dictatorships, right? So yesterday, the regime unleashed a wave of mass arrests and raids on activists and their families, tied to next year's elections and the election of the Coordination Council. Lukashenko eliminates any possibility of dissent. No, it's not an ordinary case. I mean, this is a dictatorship, and he only got in previously on account, there were huge riots and stuff when he was voted in before because that was rigged, and he only got in with the support of Putin, and Putin essentially placed him in position in Belarus, and so he has Putin to thank for his existence as the premier in Belarus, and as a result, he is beholden to the Kremlin. And now he's putting things in place to stop free and fair elections, doing exactly what Putin has done himself, which is kind of locking up dissenters and locking up opposition leaders. With Russia, it's Navalny, Boris Nemtsov was killed. People abroad are in exile, and this is happening in Belarus, and that is real sadness for those in Belarus who want an open democracy. In Kazakhstan, a mercenary of the PMC Wagner has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for participation in the war in Ukraine. The court in Karaganda region of Kazakhstan has sentenced 34-year-old resident Alexei Geopol to 6 years and 8 months in prison for participation in the war against Ukraine. Geopol fought on the side of Russia for PMC Wagner. The man was found guilty of mercenarism and committing a serious criminal offence against the peace and security of mankind, as well as ordered to confiscate his funds, which, according to the court, were obtained by criminal means. At this trial, he pleaded guilty and stated that he went to war because of financial need. Interesting positioning there of Kazakhstan. Again, they're an interesting country to look at, Kazakhstan. They're trying to distance themselves, it seems, from that Russian sphere of influence, rather like some of the other nations, Armenia and even Azerbaijan, to a greater extent, than previously anyway. NATO allies are putting pressure on Turkey to finally approve Sweden's bid to join the alliance, according to Agence France-Presse. In particular, the US Secretary of State Blinken told his Turkish counterpart that Sweden's application should be ratified as soon as possible. Turkey and Hungary remain the only NATO members that have not yet ratified Sweden's application. And then, actually, this came out. So the Turkish parliament may pass a law ratifying Sweden's membership to NATO before the end of this year, according to Reuters, citing sources. So hopefully that will take place. But interestingly, Hungary remain, who knew, a bit of a thorn in the side of, any decent institution in the world. Right. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Check out the live chat I had last night with Greg Terry from the Greg Terry Experience. Really appreciate all your support. It's been a long one today. A lot going on. Take care. Speak soon.